Families. My name is Chad Luzier, and I'm the Associate Principal at West Seaford Elementary School. Please hold 1 second. Nice throw. I would like to share with you The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, Chapter 3. So please sit back and relax, and here we go. Chapter 3, Discovering a Thing Called Science. The year I turned 13, I became aware that things in me were changing, not only my body, but also my interests. I was growing up. I stopped hunting as much and began hanging out more in the trading center with Jeffrey and Gilbert. We met other boys for endless rounds of bawo, a popular Mancala game played with marbles on long wooden board lined with holes. The object is to capture your opponent's front row and stop him from moving. Bawo requires strategy and quick thinking. I'll admit, I was pretty good and often beat the other boys. This filled me with joy, since several of them had been the ones who'd benched me in soccer. If I could have a magic power, at least I had bawo. Also, around this time, Jeffrey and I started taking apart old radios to see what was inside. After a lot of trial and error, we began figuring out how they worked. Since we didn't have electricity or television, the radio was our only link to the world outside our village. The same was true in many other parts of Africa. In most places you go, whether it's deep into the forest or in the city, you'll see people listening to small portable radios. At the time, Malawi had 2 stations called Radio 1 and Radio 2, both run by the government. In addition to giving us the news and sports, they also played Malawian reggae music and American rhythm and blues, along with Sheshua gospel choirs and Sunday church sermons. From the moment I heard sound coming out of the radio as a boy, I wanted to know how it got there. When Jeffrey and I started cracking them open to investigate, it was like spying a secret world. Why are these wires different colors? I asked. And where do they all go? Jeffrey said. And how do they make it possible to hear Dolly Parton, who lives all the way in America? And how can Dolly Parton be singing on Radio 1 while Shadrach Wham preaches on Radio 2? We had lots of questions, but no one seemed to have any answers. So I set out to find them myself. After cracking open every radio we could find, Jeffrey and I figured out some things. For instance, we discovered that white noise, that static sound that you hear between stations, and most other functions originate from the circuit board. This is the biggest piece inside a radio, and it contains all the little wires and bits of plastic. Beans are called transistors, and they control the power that moves from the radio into the speakers. I learned this by removing one and hearing the volume greatly reduce. Before long, people were bringing their broken radios and asking us to fix them. Our workshop was in Jeffrey's bedroom, which is piled high with heaps of wires, circuit boards, motors, cracked casings, and countless other pieces we collected. Just like with our toy trucks, we relied heavily on recycled materials and a lot of improvisation. The same applied to the tools we needed to fix the radios. For instance, we didn't have a proper soldering iron to weld the metal pieces to the circuit boards. Instead, I took a thick piece of wire and heated it over a kitchen fire until it was red hot, then quickly used it to fuse the metal joints together. In order to tell what was broken in the radios, though, we needed a power source. We didn't have any money to buy new batteries, so Jeffrey and I started digging in waste bins at the trading center, looking for ones that people had discarded. You're probably wondering, how can you use dead battery? Well, the trick is finding the right kind of dead battery. Batteries used in handheld radios were deader than dead, mainly because these devices do not require a lot of power and drain the battery of every drop. The trick was to find batteries used in big cassette or CD players. Since they demand such high voltage, the battery would often fail before it was totally empty, leaving a few precious morsels of power. To test the battery, we would attach a wire to each end, the positive and the negative, and connect those to a small flashlight bulb. The brighter the bulb, the stronger the battery. Next, we would crush a shake carton, making it good and flat, and roll it into a tube. Inside, we stacked the batteries with the negative and the positive ends facing the same direction. Then we ran wires from each end of the tube to the radio itself, attaching them to the positive and negative heads where the batteries normally would go. Together, this stack of garbage was usually enough to power the radio, at least long enough to fix it. On weekends, Jeffrey and I spent our days in the workshop listening to music while we tinkered. If we were lucky enough to get a cassette player to fix, and if there was enough juice in the batteries, Gilbert would let us borrow tapes by the Black Missionaries, our favorite local reggae band. Hey, turn it up. Yeah, for sure. When customers came to see us, they sometimes seemed surprised. I heard someone here fixes radios, one lady said, looking around. Yes, I answered, turning down the music. That would be me and my colleague, Mr. Jeffrey. What's the problem? But you're so young, she said. How can children be doing this kind of work? You mustn't doubt us, ma'am. Tell us the problem. I can't get the stations anymore. There's only static. Let me see. Yes. I think I can manage. You'll have it before supper. Make it before 6. It's Saturday and I want to hear my theater dramas. Sure. Often people stop by to give us compliments. Look at the little scientist, one man said. Then, keep it up, boys, and one day you'll have a good job. At this point, I didn't know much about science or that doing science could be a job, but I was becoming more and more curious about how things worked. For instance, how did petrol make a car engines work? Why was the foul-smelling liquid so important? Easy, I thought. I'll just ask someone with a car. In the trading center, I began flagging down truck drivers. What makes a truck move? I asked them. How does it work? But no one could tell me. They just smile and shrug their shoulders. Really, how can you drive a truck and not know how it works? Even my father, who I thought knew everything, was stumped. The petrol burns and releases fire and, well, I'm not really sure. Compact disc players were just becoming popular in our area, and these things really fascinated me. I'd watch people insert a shiny little wheel, press a button, and suddenly hear music. How in the world, I wondered? How do they put songs on that disc? I'd ask. Who cares? People would answer. My neighbor in the trading center seemed happy to enjoy their cars and CD players without explanation, but not me. I was filled with the desire to understand, and the questions never stopped coming. If finding these answers was the job of a scientist, then I wanted to become one. Of all the things to be curious about, what intrigued me the most were dynamos. They looked like small metal bottles and attached to the wheels of a bicycle. I'd always see them around Wimby, but never knew what they did. That is until my father's friend rode up one evening with a headlamp shining from his handlebars. As soon as he jumped off, the light disappeared. Hey, what made the lamp go off? I asked. I didn't see him flip a switch or anything. The dynamo, he said. I stopped pedaling. I waited for him to go inside. Then I jumped on his bike to investigate. Sure enough, the light came on as soon as I started pedaling around the courtyard. I flipped the bike upside down and traced the wires from the headlamp all the way back to the tire where the dynamo was attached. It had its own little metal wheel at the top that pressed against the rubber. When the tires spun, so did that wheel, and there was light. I couldn't get this out of my head. How did a spinning metal wheel create light? The next time the man came to visit, I flipped the bike over for another look. This time I noticed the wires had come loose from the lamp. While the tire was spinning, I accidentally brushed the bare end of the wire against the metal handlebar and saw a spark. Aha, my first clue. I called over my trusted colleague, Mr. Jeffrey. Bambo, bring me one of your radios, I said. One that works. I'm on to something big. Sure. Just like with our battery tests, I connected the two wires from the dynamo to the positive and negative heads on the radio where the batteries normally go. Okay, Jeffrey, now start pedaling. When Jeffrey spun the wheel, nothing happened. So I took the wires out of the radio and reattached them to the headlamp. When Jeffrey pedaled, the light flickered on. Mr. Jeffrey, my experiment shows that the dynamo and the bulb are both working properly. So why won't the radio play? He said. Try sticking the wires somewhere else. He pointed to a little socket in the radio labeled AC. Try here, he said. Lo and behold, when I jammed the wires inside, that radio came to life. Tonga, we shouted. I pedaled the bicycle, and Billy Conda sang his happy music on the radio too. Jeffrey became so excited that he started to dance. Keep pedaling, he said. That is one of my favorite songs. Hey, but you want to dance too? Without realizing it, Jeffrey and I had just discovered something called alternating and direct current. Of course, we wouldn't know its true meaning until much later. But while I was cranking the pedals so hard that my arm became tired, I kept wondering, what can do the pedaling for me so that both of us can dance? Well, the answer was electricity. The dynamo had given me a small taste of the magical thing, and I soon became determined to try to make some on my own. Many of you have probably been saying, but doesn't everyone have electricity? It's true that most people in Europe and America are lucky to have lights whenever they want them, plus things like air conditioning and microwave ovens. But in Africa, we're not so lucky. In fact, only about 8% of Malawians have electricity in their homes, and most of them live in the city. Not having electricity meant that I could do anything. Not having electricity meant that I couldn't do anything at night. I couldn't read or finish my radio repairs. I couldn't do my homework or study from school. No watching television. It also meant that when I walked outside to the toilet, I couldn't see the big spiders or roaches that like to play in the latrine at night. I only felt them crunch under my bare feet. Whenever the sun went down, most people stopped what they were doing, brushed their teeth, and went straight to bed. Not at 10 p.m. or even 9 o'clock, but 7 in the evening. Who goes to bed at 7 in the evening? Well, most of Africa. The only lights we had were lanterns, and not the fancy kind that are powered by batteries. Our lanterns were made from empty powdered milk cans, which we bent closed at the top and filled with kerosene. Our wick was a piece of an old t-shirt, which we ripped into strips and soaked in the fuel. Kerosene looks a lot like gasoline and smells just as bad. Worse, it produced a thick black smoke that irritated our eyes and throats and made us cough. And because most people's roofs were made from straw, the lanterns were a real fire hazard. Growing up, I heard many stories of people's homes burning down because someone knocked over a lantern. Electricity does exist in Malawi, but it's very expensive and hard to get at your house. Getting on the grid involves squeezing in a back of a pickup truck taxi and riding several hours to Lilongwe, the capital city. There you would catch another bus to the offices of Electric Supply Corporation of Malawi and wait hours in a stuffed lobby until sour-faced agent called your name. What do you want? They might ask. I would like electricity, you'd tell them. We'll see what we can do. After you'd fill out an application and paid a lot of money, they would ask you to draw them a map to your village and house. That's me, you say. I live here. And if your application got approved, and if the workers were able to find your home, then you'd have to pay more money for them to install a pole and wires. Once you had electricity, you'd be very happy. You'd plug in your radio and dance to the music. That is, until Eskom cut the power, which they did every week, usually at night. After all that money and trouble, you'd still find yourself going to bed at 7. Why does Eskom turn off the power? Part of the reason is deforestation, which is a real problem in Malawi and other parts of the world. Thanks to the tobacco and maize estates, most of the lush green forests that once covered the country back in Grandpa's youth are gone. The rest is being cut down and used as firewood. You see, since we don't have electricity, most Malawians, including my family, rely on fires for everything from cooking to heating bath water. The problem is that now the firewood is running low. It's so bad that sometimes my sisters have to walk several miles just to find a handful of wood to cook our breakfast. And if you've ever built a campfire, you know that a handful of wood doesn't last very long. Without trees and forests covering the land, simple storms can turn into flash floods. Whenever it rains heavily, the water rushes through our farms and carries the important soil and minerals that helps plants grow. The soil, plus a lot of plastic bags and other garbage, washes into the Shire River, where Eskom produces all the Malawi electricity from turbines. The turbines get clogged with mud and garbage and have to be turned off and cleaned, which causes power cuts across the country. And every time Eskom issues power cuts, they also lose money. This means they must raise prices to get their money back, making the cost of electricity higher and higher. So with no crops because of floods and no electricity because of clogged rivers and high prices, people continue to cut down trees for firewood. It's like that. One of Eskom power lines was connected to Gilbert's house, probably because his dad was the chief. The first time I went there as a boy, I couldn't believe what I saw. Gilbert walked into the living room, touched the wall, and the light came on, just by touching the wall. Of course, now I know that he really flipped the light switch, but after that day, I started thinking, why can't I touch the wall and get light? Why am I always the one who gets stuck in the dark searching for a match? I knew that bringing electricity to my village was going to take more than just a bicycle dynamo or any wizard's best magic. And anyway, my family couldn't afford to buy either of those things, but I did have one bit of hope. I would soon be taking my final exams and leave primary school. If I passed and advanced to secondary school, what kids in America call middle school, I knew I'd be studying more science. Several schools had special science programs where students got to work on all kinds of experiments. If I could get into one of those places, perhaps my dream of becoming a scientist would come true. The current world wouldn't be in my current school, Wimby Primary certainly didn't seem like a place where scientists come from. It was located down the wooded trail from Gilbert's house, just opposite the mosque. It was a community school supported by the government, and the conditions were quite shabby. The iron sheets on the roof were filled with holes. When it rained, the water poured down on us. The rooms were too small for a large number of students, and some classes were held outside under trees. With all the trucks going past, plus the birds, insects, and people walking around, it was impossible to concentrate. The administrators didn't provide us with lesson books of our own. The teachers always ran out of chalk, and most students never owned a pencil. Ask any child in Malawi to spell their name or give the sum of 2 times 2, and they'll probably scribble an answer in the dirt with their finger. Another problem at Wimby were the toilets. Just a few grass huts with a deep hole covered with logs. It didn't take long for the termites to make their nests inside these logs and eat them hollow. One afternoon, they finally collapsed with my classmate Angela squatting atop of them. Several hours passed before someone heard her crying from the slimy bottom and helped her out. Ugh. She was so traumatized that we never saw her again. In order to graduate from Wimby Primary and advance to secondary school, I had to pass a test, and it was a hard test. The standard 8 exam covered every subject and lasted for 3 whole days. For several months, I stayed awake past the dark and studied beside the smoky lamp. I spent hours reading over my lessons in Shishwa, English, math, social studies, and agriculture, a subject that we all had to take because we were farmers. For the most part, my Shishwa lessons were easy, so I spent most of my time working on English, which I found very difficult. For agriculture, they wanted us to know things like how to tell if your animals were sick with infections, and if so, how to help cure them. Most kids already knew these kinds of things from working with their fathers, but even still, I wanted to make sure my answers were perfect. I took tests in mid-September. For 3 torturous days, I bit my nails over equilateral triangles and circumferences and whether Amprol or iodine were the right kind of medicine for a chicken with blood in its poop. I was a bundle of nerves by the time I finished, but I felt confident. The only bad part was the grades wouldn't be announced for another 3 months, leaving me with a lot of time for worry. Unlike in America, secondary school wasn't free. It cost money to attend, and because of that, most kids in Malawi didn't even bother going. My older sister, Annie, was already halfway finished with her schooling, and I couldn't wait to have my own chance. Another exciting thing about the upper grades was getting a new uniform. Soon I could ditch the little schoolboy shorts required for younger students and walk tall in trousers. Once my exam was over, I waited for Gilbert to finish. No more short pants for us, and I said when he appeared, "That's right, and until we start school again, our mornings are free. What shall we do?" "Let's get Kamba and go hunting," I said. "It's been too long." "Yeah, for sure." We were halfway home when Kamba met us in the trail, tail wagging as if he'd heard my every word. That afternoon, the three of us hunted for hours until the yellow sun sank behind the highlands. With our sacks full, we walked home under an orange dusk and made a great fire in the courtyard, cooked our birds, and ate like men. And that is the end of chapter 3. I hope you enjoyed it. Please stay tuned for chapter 4, The Uncertain Life of an American Farmer. And I'll toss this to our next reader. Here you go. All right, hope you enjoyed. Have a good one.